The thing that I did on Doom Patrol a lot was to use the spell check function in the computer, and you don't really get this anymore. But I would just write in a nonsense word like scribbles and then ask it to suggest an alternative, and it would come up with something. So if you wrote a lot of nonsense words but with proper syntax and proper sentence structure, it would then translate it into this bizarre, just whatever word it could come up with to get as close as it could to the word gazvlupflitz, and it would suggest something. So you ended up with this absolute run of really bizarre, disconnected, poetic images.
So, did X-Men actually rip off Doom Patrol? Whenever somebody or there's a mention of X-Men and DP together, someone will eventually bring up the argument that X-Men is a direct knockoff of DP. But is it actually a really one-to-one copy of Doom Patrol? At first glance, the resemblance between them can be damning, like both of them are called the world's most strangest heroes. Both teams are social rejects and fit for being different from the rest, led by geniuses in a wheelchair, Chief and Professor X, and both fight against evil organizations that call themselves Brotherhoods. And coincidentally, came out in the same year with only 2-3 months time difference, as first debut of Doom Patrol happened on issue 80 of My Greatest Adventure in June of 1963, and the X-Men came out in September of 1963. But that's just surface level glance of it all, and those who participate in CBM fandoms don't go further than that. In actuality, X-Men and Doom Patrol has nothing in common after that. But before we get into details, I might need to explain who they are as a team, in case any of you haven't heard of them both or one or the other. Note that I only look at the original first titles they had, their first run and appearances, but of course I'll mention their further runs, but only to facilitate the point. With X-Men, I'm sure you know a lot more about them than the so-called Doom Patrol, but X-Men is a superhero team of mutants who either had suffered an incident that gave them superpowers, were born with, and those who have been born a mutant have faced prejudice and discrimination for humans. And Charles Xavier, aka Professor X, created a school for the gifted children to protect them from the society's harm and help them to learn how to control their powers and love themselves for who they are, and formed a superhero team to show them in good light to the public and fight the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants led by Magneto. The initial team included Cyclops, Iceman, Angel, Beast, and later introduced in the same issue as the new addition to the team, Jean Grey, aka Marvel Girl. Now you know the basic explanation of X-Men, now it's time for Doom Patrol. Doom Patrol is a superhero team of the people who have suffered disastrous incidents that in exchange of gaining superpowers have involuntarily sacrificed a part of themselves, irreversibly turning them into outsiders. Rita Farr was a successful actress of her time who have insisted doing her own stunts, which led her to being chased by crocodiles and led to the chemical gas vapors that gave her ability to change size and manipulate her body. Larry Trainor was a test pilot who was testing the new experimental rocket plane but got himself into unknown alien energy and his plane crashed, but in the result gained the ability to let out the negative spirit out of his body, being able to fly and have super strength, at the cost of being in near death for 60 seconds while using it, and radioactive, forcing him to be wrapped in anti-radioactive bandages. And finally, Cliff Steele, the one who has suffered the most, as before his disaster, he was a daredevil who did everything for the thrill, but it almost led to his demise on a race when he crashed on the killer curve. Nothing survived but the brain, but luckily to Cliff, a mysterious man saved him and built a robotic body to bring him back to life, turning him into a Robo-Man. And that mysterious man was none other than Niles Calder, aka the Chief, the leader of Doom Patrol. On top of Cliff's robotic body, he helped Larry, and after his powerful speech and disabling the bomb, they assembled into a superhero team called Doom Patrol, now known as Elastigirl, Negative Man, and Robo-Man, fighting the threats among the likes of General Immortus and Brotherhood of Evil. Now that you know the basic picture of both titles, we can start. The whole discourse of Doom Patrol and X-Men is built upon the foundation that both of them share the same idea, outcasts of the society being superheroes, but beyond that, there is no similarities. X-Men is a school and a team led by a man who wants to better the relationship between the humans and mutants by helping them in trouble. Doom Patrol is a superhero team that functions as a disaster response team. Some pointed out Niles Calder and Charles Xavier, but proof they had was only that they're both super smart and both are bound to a wheelchair. Niles has no superpowers, while Xavier is a telepath. And origin stories and how they met the villains are different. Niles met General Immortus as a young scientist who was hired by him in order to find out how to extend a human life, but later forced as he finds out the true nature of his, only to then fake his death and in progress lost his ability to walk. While Xavier met Magneto in Haifa psychiatric facility and later fought against Baron Strucker to save Gabby. Obviously, both characters had multiple changes, but with Niles his retcon stayed on point, as it was changed so that Niles orchestrated the disasters that have happened to key members of DP, directly responsible for ruining the lives of Cliff, Larry, and Rita. Just to see if theory of catastrophe curve was true. In the show, it was changed so that he worked for Bureau of Normalcy and tried to find a way with mortality to stay with his daughter Dorothy. The major difference between them, Niles met Immortus as his employer and later as his captor, and Charles met Magneto as his friend. And while we're on topic, Brotherhood of Evil and Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. The only thing they share is a name and that they both came out in the same month. Which brings me to the next topic of production. You gotta understand that making a comic book is no simple matter. You can't make a comic within a week even with a full team of professionals, but when we're talking about their first appearances, the time difference increased to 2-3 months, but even with that much time, it still won't have been enough, as the same idea would have to be brought to the publisher to be reviewed and approved, create designs of the characters, and go through an editor to see if it's suitable enough for the print. But the first X-Men issue was created by the two legendary creators as Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, if not of all time, but definitely the most creative minds of comic book history. And the special trait of theirs was that they were lightning fast than an average artist and a writer, especially Jack Kirby, who produced 3 times more than the average artist back then and probably now. With them, it will probably be considered as a possibility, as also the co-creator of Doom Patrol, Arnold Drake, said the following. I've become more and more convinced that Stan Lee knowingly stole the X-Men for the Doom Patrol. Over the years, I learned that an awful lot of writers and artists were working surreptitiously between Marvel and DC. Therefore, for when I first brought the idea into Murray Boltino's office, it would have been easy for someone to walk over and hear that I was working on a story about a bunch of reluctant superheroes who are led by a man in a wheelchair. So over the years, I began to feel that Stan had more lead time than I realized. He may well have had 4, 5, or even 6 months. Which also brings another possibility up, the word of mouth. Countless creators who have interned and staffed at both offices of DC and Marvel could have discussed and speak about the ideas of other notable creators, and Stan could have picked up Arnold's idea from some minor conversation. But in the same month of September, also published the following comics as Avengers issue number 1, 45th issue of Tales of Suspense, issue 4 of Amazing Spider-Man, 96th issue of Journey into Mystery, 47th issue of Tales to Astonish, and 3rd issue of Sergeant Fury and Howling Commandos. All of which have been worked on by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby together and separately. It's impressive that both of them could have nailed such a milestone almost each month, but for them to publish first issues of Avengers and X-Men, they had to discontinue some of the other Marvel titles. You see, Martin Goodman, who was a publisher at Marvel, which before was known instead as Atlas, had his own distribution company, through which published Atlas's comics to the market. But in 1957, Goodman closed his distribution company in exchange of using a more cheaper alternative named as America's News Distribution. But then not long after, the same year, went out of business due to US government's antitrust litigation against them and losing most notable titles and clients like Collier's, Women's Home Companion, and Dell Publishing Company. And Marvel was left with no choice but to go with the company named Independent News Distribution, who would later go under the name of DC Comics. IND, in exchange of publishing Atlas, imposed strict rules so they would outshine in their own comics, with them now only being able to publish 8 monthly titles until 1964, when the sales outdid IND and lifted the restrictions. In 1963, in order to publish Avengers and X-Men, they had to discontinue Love Romance, lasting 106 issues, and Gunsmoke Western for 77 issues, with their last issues being released on the same year on May 2nd. But considering the fact that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby had a head start practically since December 1962, it's quite possible that he has heard of the concept, but that's if we're being nitpicky, and it is very unlikely that he has ever heard of Doom Patrol. In fact, if we're going to be nitpicky, then the X-Men ripped off Doom Patrol makes no sense, but that Doom Patrol is inspired by Fantastic Four is a more logical statement than with the X-Men. Think about it, Doom Patrol is a complete reflection of FF. Fantastic Four is a team of brilliant scientists who suffered an accident that gave them superpowers and eventually learned how to use them for good and became a family on top of it all. While Doom Patrol is a team of bunch of misfits that have almost nothing in common, but that they have suffered incidents that turn them into freaks, but eventually learn how to use their powers for good, and even though they fought and argued with each other, they considered each other family until the very end. Doom Patrol and Fantastic Four share more than meets the eye, characters for example, really similar to each other to an extent. Elastigirl had powers of elasticity and could expand herself either to be big or small, similarly like Mr. Fantastic. Negative Man could let out himself a negative radioactive ghost with who he could fly and shoot lasers and possess increased strength, but only for 60 seconds before he dies, almost like Human Torch, apart from lighting himself on fire without the fear of dying. And finally Robot Man and Thing, both are powerhouses and are very similar if not almost identical. Of course, before they became who they are not exactly the same. Cliff was a daredevil, while Ben was a part of Yancey's street gang in his youth and became a test pilot astronaut, had their bodies completely changed from flesh and blood to the metallic and rocky shells. Both are considered freaks and yearn for their human bodies to return, eventually accepting who they are. And similar to the Invisible Woman, I have found none yet, but people said that it could be Chief and that he's actually a combination of both Reed and Seal, since he's not participating in missions. But in issue 95, when Robot Man went unconscious, he didn't let the team to go duo and created a special suit for himself to assist Doom Patrol in battle and replace Robot Man while he's out cold. But as well, both Mr. Fantastic and Niles Caller had their hands on creation of the team, as they caused the incident that gained their teammates superpowers, as it is with Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol issue 57 and Fantastic Four vs. X-Men issue 2, only to be revealed in the final 4th issue that Reed had no hands with this but Dr. Doom, who tried to destroy not just the trust between the FF but also the Psycho Reed Reachers. With major difference being which the DP issue 57 came out in July of 1992 and FF X-Men issue 2 came out in February of 1987. Eventually throughout their adventures, they are bothered by a kid who won't leave their side, Beast Boy and Spider-Man, the conspiracy of Green-Headed League, the invasion of Skrulls, and a stranger coming in and trying to steal the girl of the team, Manto and Namor. I could go on like this forever, but the point is that we can nitpick about everything like that. DC Comics and Marvel have a lot of similar characters that could make a reader question if they're supposed to be a knockoff version of that superhero or not. Some are inspired, some are blatantly obvious. Deadpool and Deathstroke, Batman and Moon Knight, Century Superman, Swamp Thing and Man-Thing, and on and on and on. Doom Patrol and X-Men is just a mere coincidence, and even if it's a copy, it doesn't mean that one thing is better than the other, and that we as the readers shouldn't shy away from the new things we learn about if the first impression or the first opinion we hear about them is that they're a knockoff of some team that came out in the 60s. A lot of creators get accused of plagiarism and copying other creators' work. Some are false, but some are true and they don't care. But we must value the writer's integrity, and assuming things like this can be harmful to you too as a reader, that you shy away from reading either something really good or something really terrible. Read terrible books, read great books. It can help with our understanding of how storytelling is done right and learn how to write. And besides, X-Men is alive and well title, while Doom Patrol had its last run 3 years ago and only had a couple of appearances in other titles and events of DC Universe. In the original titles, Doom Patrol was finished on 121st issue of 1968, while the Uncanny X-Men lived on for more 2 years. And in the mentioned last run, the writer Dennis Culver attempted to bring the energy of X-Men to Doom Patrol after Lazarus Planet event, but it seems to have been dropped behind the scenes. But anyways, this was Page Skull, and I'll see you all later.